so fortunate to live in such a beautiful place, and it has inspired artists and authors since 1850. So today we're here at Excelsior Bay Books, and we're here to talk with Lisa Stevens. She's one of 3 co-authors of the new book, Images of America, Lake Minnetonka. Lisa, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Beverly.
Yeah. Tell us, Lisa, how did the book come about?
Well, it was a project of Arcadia Publishing in South Carolina, and they do history books all over the United States that all follow sort of the same format. They're Images of America books. They're primarily picture books, and they ask you to follow a very specific format, which can be very challenging but also kind of liberating. And they approached us. They approached the historians of the Lake Minnetonka area. I responded, said, I can't write a book about the history of Lake Minnetonka. I went to the Wayzata Historical Society. She said, maybe together. And then we had a 3rd author come on board, and we were able to do it, kind of combining all of our archives. So.
Because Lake Minnetonka is not just Excelsior, and it's not just Wayzata. I mean, it's a broad, kind of separated community, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really even larger than we realized. And that communities are somewhat separate today. We kind of have our own little areas, and it was interesting in working on the book. We realized part of this was just changing from boat travel and even walking across the ice or riding across the ice to having to follow the shoreline, which the settlers didn't have to do. So they were almost more interconnected than we are today. And there was almost more of a homogeneous feel to the lake area, I think, at that time. So.
Well, weren't there a lot of things that brought them together at that time? I mean, the fact that they were creating a resort community, did that bring people in the different towns together in some ways?
Yeah, the resorts were very separate and privately owned, so it was, in some cases, moguls and capitalists combating and fighting each other for the biggest piece of the pie. But the people who ran boats, a lot of people who worked at hotels, all had to work together. It was almost kind of a backstage feel, I think, sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Well, partly to get people out here and also to get resources out here, food and whatever. And also there's the whole thriving economy going on beyond that, too, I'm sure.
Yeah, and there lots of logging. Again, the rich sort of came out to get richer. The perhaps not so rich came out to be self-sufficient. If they were in hot cities and had no chance to get ahead, some of them were butlers, some of them were storekeepers or tailors. They came out, they bought land and sold it, they farmed and took care of their families and fed other people in their community, made money that way. The way they did exist was interesting. I'll be an ox cart driver. I was a butler, but now that's what I'll do. I'm a minister. I think I'll also be a dentist and a steamboat captain. So they wore many hats.
Well, they had to, didn't they? Because there wasn't much out here. I mean, you had lots of opportunities to try different things and do different things.
Yep.
Interesting. Well, what was it like working with 2 other authors? And what different things did you bring to the mix?
It was certainly challenging, but it was also really fun. It was nice knowing that somebody always had your back. Joni at Wayzata Historical Society is a teacher. So I think she kind of came at it from a learning perspective often, and she has a real passion for the lake area. So she would write a great deal in these little 70-word captions that we were allotted.
You said they had to be 70 words.
In that, yeah, 2 pictures in a page, it had to be 70 words. And you can't say a lot about, that much history in 70 words, but we started to learn how to do it. Liz Vandam from the Westonka Historical Society has a couple of different books under her belt, so she was very good at sort of structuring and shaping what we were saying. And I'm kind of a research fiend, so I was out there researching like crazy, trying to get everything absolutely back to primary sources, but I could be very terse, and so we'd all kind of, combine together and critique each other's work and then take a final pass to smooth it out so that you kind of heard one voice instead of 3.
Mm-hmm. Well, I noticed that each chapter has a nice introduction that talks about different parts of our development, of our history, and then you've got lots and lots and lots of pictures.
Yep.
What was the process like gathering all those pictures?
That was really difficult.
Was it?
Because it was an embarrassment of riches, which is wonderful, but we were able to combine all of our archives and then go to all the private collections and all the public collections, and people would come in and bring us things. We tried to get the word out that we were doing this. And then we had to start rejecting pictures. We probably had 3 or 4 books worth. And then there were also restrictions placed by Arcadia. They wanted very high quality photos. Some of the things we had were tiny thumbnails, and we just couldn't use them, which was often really heartbreaking, because we'd have a picture that no one had ever seen before, and we couldn't use it because it was too tiny and we couldn't get the original. But we went to different archives that we found online, and people were tremendously generous, and that was really heartening, because now we could take things from all over the country and put them in one place where people could see them. They didn't have to surf the internet or do anything like that. They could just pick up this book, and there they all were, presented as well as they could be. So it was hard editing them out. It was hard making the selections. It was heartbreaking to watch some of the early pioneers bite the dust, but we had no choice. So.
Well, it is interesting to take a look, and that's what's, it's almost becomes a milestone in our community to have this as a resource, because a lot of things, I think, haven't been documented before and haven't been presented. And I just learned so much just taking, just thumbing through it and going, oh my gosh, who knew that? Who knew that? Who knew that? I didn't realize how Water Street got its name until I read the book.
I know. That's a little secret, that there was actually water running down the street, and they cleverly named it Water Street. Right, and it's still there, supposedly.
Oh, is it?
My understanding is, it's under the buildings in pipes running down the same course of Water Street.
So it was a stream that ran from Galpin Lake, which is just south to into one of the many inlets that come into Lake Minnetonka.
Yep.
And then there's one outlet, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can understand why Lake Street and Wayzata got its name, and Lake Street here got its name.
Oh, sure.
It's on the lake. But Water Street, who knew?
Right. Been looking, so now I know. Well, did you come up with any surprises when you were putting together the book?
Well, they're probably history nerd surprises, but we thought so.
History nerd surprises.
Some people would say, yeah, that's really interesting, but we thought they were fascinating. The Hotel del Otero, which was in Mound, had always been said to be built, I believe it was like 1855, and sometimes you see 1878.
Really?
Well, that's weird. Okay. And then,
that is weird, because that's like right after the town was founded.
Yeah, and the railroad came through, I think it was 1881, and but just these odd dates. And we worked with a historian, Scott McGinnis, who's very well known around the Lake Minnetonka area, and he said, I can't find the hotel. I said, what do you mean you can't find the hotel? And he said, I'm looking at maps, it's not there. And as we went on, it turns out it didn't turn up till 1892, as far as we can tell. Even when it burned in 1945, all the newspaper articles said, yeah, it was built in 1885, 1878, somewhere around there. So we don't know why. We haven't figured that part out yet. We're still going through James J. Hill's records to see if he had something to do with it, when it was actually built, but it did not turn up anywhere until 1892, and we don't know where the story started. So it's kind of interesting to try to figure that out.
So what would be the connection between James J. Hill and the hotel in Spring Park?
He owned the railway that came through, and he sort of built hotels along it to actually attract riders to the railway. And normally he did this more quickly. He did it with the Hotel Lafayette in Minnetonka Beach, and which was the largest hotel on the lake, just gigantic. But this one he's also associated with, or was rumored to have been ever since books were being written. Now we don't know. But there were a couple of other things. One of the things that we enjoyed, or I enjoyed the most, was looking at the pictures very closely, getting as close as you could, and different people would pop up. There was a Major Halstead who was a hermit in Minnetrista, and we were looking at a picture of a boat and looking at it was a very good picture, and we were able to get close and looking at all the different faces, and suddenly there he is perched in the bow, and we realized we'd been doing this so much, we were starting to recognize the people that were in most of the pictures. Even I think I saw some of the tourists show up, a couple years in a row, and that got a little scary.
So it was like, in a way, you were living that history in some ways.
You become very close to your subject, sort of, and it's especially, I have to say, the women too. You look at them and say, how did you possibly survive this? How did you come out here? The first lake settler, Sarah Shaver, had twins in 1853 by herself in a cabin, you know, south of Gray's Bay.
And survived.
And survived, yeah. And so did the twins. But
And I noticed one other thing going through the book is how many of the buildings burned, and these beautiful buildings, which we don't have anymore because they would have used, I don't know, fire heat and wouldn't have had good ways to get the firemen. I think there was one building that burned and the firemen were at a concert or a ball game.
yes, that was actually the high school.
The high school here.
Excelsior High School. They were all in Hopkins at some big final, you know, game, and there was no one to put the fire out. They had to come back quickly, and it didn't work. But Excelsior in particular was built of wood, and it took a couple of major fires until they said, you know, brick from now on, and that you will notice most of Excelsior is still standing and is built out of brick. So. But fire was a huge hazard.
A huge hazard. And I think it's also interesting how many of the buildings were repurposed.
Yep.
So you used to have something that started out as a church and then it became a whatever, a community center and apartments. We've got one of the old churches here in town is a...
Yeah, and that's true all over the lake. Excelsior in particular moved buildings, and they did repurpose. I always thought, I never really knew why Excelsior stayed the way it did, and I thought that they were great historic preservationists, and someone finally pointed out to me they didn't have enough money to tear the town down and build again like some of the other towns did, and so we ended up with these beautiful old buildings. And many of them have been repurposed, and it's true about at least one building in every lakeside city, I'd say, has been saved, but some of the cities not so much. You can't recognize a lot of it anymore.
Right. So working together, the three historical societies working together, what has come out of the effort and the collaboration?
It's, you know, we just like the lake communities, we tend to be very separate, and I didn't know much about the history of the other communities. I had a general understanding of lake area history, but in particular, Mound West Tonka area, I didn't go there much, and I didn't know much about the history. So the three of us certainly have a better grasp of Lake Minnetonka history, but the societies started talking and started sort of collaborating. And Western Hennepin County Pioneer Association up in Long Lake, we went in and spoke with them. Deep Haven Historical Society, we asked them how they would want their area represented. Museum of Lake Minnetonka, Minnesota Streetcar Museum. There are so many historical societies around Lake Minnetonka. And we're actually now, this is not a byproduct of the book, but we're now meeting quarterly just to sort of get together, talk history, talk about challenges and opportunities for us to collaborate in the future, all the lake area historical societies. And that was one of the parts of the book too. We wanted to make sure we got people's history right, because you do have ownership over it sometimes. So I wanted to say, what's important to you? What story would you want to tell? We wish we could have partnered with everybody, and that obviously wouldn't have been possible, but we wanted to engage them as much as we could and give everybody ownership sort of over the history of the area, because it's a huge lake, but it does have sort of one big story to tell.
It does, and you really get the sense of the connections when you look at the book.
Great, yeah, that was something we were hoping for.
Well, I think this would be a good time to take a look at some of those pictures, and I've picked out some, and I think you've picked out some you're interested in. So the first one we want to talk about is this picture of Sarah Chowan Shaver. She was one of the first settler, the first settler family, right?
Right.
You mentioned her earlier, that she and her husband James was a carpenter, and she cooked at the mill where he worked.
Correct.
And then they had the first twins.
Yep. And the other story connected with that particular family is that one of the twins, supposedly he wrote in later years, was bedded down for the night. A neighbor, Mrs. Robinson, I believe of Robinson's Bay, was watching them, and a large paw came through the chinks in the logs and started to take him with it, and she was able to stop it, but it was a wolf, and I don't know if it's true or not, but it's an interesting story.
It's a horrible story is what it is. And then this is really my favorite picture, actually in the whole book. It's the picture of early Excelsior, 1864. And it just shows what a burg we were at that time.
Yep.
And how far we've come from there.
Yeah, I love that one too. I'm always terrified that we're going to find a copy of it that'll say, this is Eden Prairie. Because it's so, you would not recognize anything about it. It could be Rhode Island. But yeah, it's a fascinating picture. And Scott McGinnis, our historian, tells us if you look very closely in the upper right-hand corner, you will see Trinity Church, which is still standing, but at that time was over on 3rd Street, and you can barely see it, but we're pretty sure, he assures us that that's Excelsior.
Well, that's another tip to look in the corners of the pictures, because I know there's lots of details there.
Yeah.
Well, here's another picture of the streetcar boats, and that's one of my favorite things about the book, is the way it really showcases the different kinds of transportation. Getting out here, getting around, and getting on the lake in summer and winter. You've got all these different things, and of course the streetcar boat, this is the famous one that was scuttled and then restored in 1980 and is now part of the Museum of Lake Minnetonka. So.
Yep, the Minnehaha, and it is wonderful to see it out there. It really takes you back in time every time it sails by.
Right, but it was really an integral part of getting around here, the streetcars that went across the water to the different communities.
Yeah, the steamboats, there were private boats, there were fleets of boats, and people toured. People took them to hotels. There has been some talk of restoring this today, even beyond what the Minnehaha does. But it's obviously a great way to travel. And the one thing I didn't know is in the winter, they really did use the lake when they could. There were some drownings, but they did take ox carts. They took, it just made sense because there were no highways. So
right, it only makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And here's the Hotel Del Otero
Yeah.
In Spring Park, which is quite a mammoth construction and was in use till 1945.
Yes, and that's actually, I think of that as one of the smaller ones, but it was very large.
50 rooms, is that correct?
I think so, and it looks very large, and it had an amazing boathouse sort of casino arcade area that kept burning, blowing down, burning, blowing down, burning, blowing down, and that was one of our favorite captions because that's all we chronicled was its demise and rise from the ashes. But.
Like so many of us.
Yeah.
And this is really one of my favorite pictures too. It's for those of you who don't know, this is Tom Rockvam as a child, and he's an author who's shared local history in like over 60 talks a year, so he's quite a well-known figure around here, and I just love the fish and the brother and the happiness, and it's just so cute.
Yes, Liz Vandam, I think, loved that picture. That was one she picked out for West Tonka, and he's a very active volunteer there and a historian in his own right. As I remember, they didn't enjoy having that picture taken. I don't remember why, but they look like they're having fun. They're really good at faking
Little boys.
Yeah.
So Lisa, what did you want to show us?
There is a picture of Wayzata shoreline, sort of the port, and it's interesting just to look at the different ports: Excelsior, Chapman's Landing in West Tonka, Mound area, the Excelsior port. They look very similar, but also very different. And particularly in the West Tonka area, there was sort of no there yet. There were more independent landings for these gigantic steamboats to come into. Wayzata had a huge, very active port area. It was where the train came early on, and it did shape the whole nature of Wayzata. Wayzata was a little rougher. There was alcohol in Wayzata. Yes, there were pool halls.
Oh my God.
And the train brought all these wealthy and sometimes dirty, nefarious tourists, including the James gang. Well, actually, they didn't take the train. I believe they rode into town. But it was a little tougher town. And then Excelsior, which had the Congregational Church from day one, had a different looking port area, ice cream when it was invented and available in this area. Again, the large steamboats would come, but it was much more shaped by religion and very dry, lots of fights about alcohol over the decades. And then, of course, all the communities continued to change throughout the years.
Well, we really want to thank you for joining us today. You've just been delightful, and just a reminder that the book, Images of America, Lake Minnetonka, you can get that here at Excelsior Bay Books. Our next guest is a nature photographer who settled here from Texas. Please welcome Kristy Walker. Kristy, I really love your photos, and I just wonder, how do you, when you go out, how do you capture such heart-to-heart connections?
Well, for me, it's really learning how to see the sacred in the ordinary. That there's such wonder in the world, right? And so being able to capture that is really what I look for. Like years ago, I took this picture of this little baby blue jay. oh my God, this is so precious, right? Because he was looking right at me, and there was this moment of connection and purity. And so I thought it was so pretty, right? So I decided to make a business card out of it. And so I used to travel a lot. And so this driver who used to take me to the airport, I gave him one of these cards. And so then, you know, months went by, and he picked me up again, and he said, I have something to show you. And he pulled out of his pocket this photograph of that little baby blue jay. And he said, whenever I get really stressed or concerned during the day, I pull out that card and I look into the eyes of that little baby bird. And he said, then I know what's really important. And so I thought, photography can do this. You know, what an amazing thing to be able to do.
Well, it really is. And I know that in your pictures, sometimes you'll take a series. So you'll see, like, I don't know how many you go, 50 hummingbirds, 100, whatever, or a different kind of flower, and you'll take pictures, or actually the ones we see. You probably take 1,000 photos, and we see, you know, the best and the finest. But how do you have the patience to get these shots? Because they're like different times of day, perhaps, or different angles, or what? I mean, it's not like when I take a picture, I just go, okay, everybody smile, you know, and it's done. But I think you have a different process. Can you talk about that?
Well, it's interesting, right, in reference to learning patience, because I think that's something that I needed to develop. So therefore, I got interested in photography, because you really do have to have patience. And it's that slowing down process, you know, that allows you for the moment to reveal itself to you. And so, you know, having curiosity along with that and wonder, it's like, I remember when I was little, my grandmother had morning glories. And I was so fascinated that they would open up in the morning and they would close in the afternoon. I'm like, how is that possible, you know? So when I moved here, I planted some morning glories, and I remember peeking out the window going, have they opened yet? Have they opened yet? You know, and so finally I just got my camera and I went out at dawn and I waited. And through that waiting and seeing that opening of this flower, which opens up as a star, which I had no idea that it did that, right? So I stayed with it because it was so interesting to me, and it just began to reveal more and more of its beauty. So then over a 3-month period, I got to see all kinds of things about this flower that I had no idea existed. If I had just walked by, took a shot, and that was it. So, you know, it's that thing, right? If you have an interest, to stay with it so that more and more of it can be revealed to you.
Well, it sounds like you gain enormously from photography. Can you name a few things besides patience and beauty?
Well, patience is the big one.
Yeah.
It's, you know, what it's shown me also is to develop the sense of curiosity, to develop wonder, to develop listening, you know, because you have to listen in the moment, because you'll get a nudge that'll say, go over here, or maybe look there, or just stop where you are. You know, so there's a lot of tuning in inwardly and trusting in the moment. And the other big part is just, you know, showing up. You know, they say 80% of life is just showing up. And so that really is true with photography, because if you just go, somehow or another, something will be revealed to you of its beauty. So,
well, I know that you help out at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, and we went online and took a look at that exciting place. They deal with thousands of animals a year, more than that, tens of thousands probably. And we're going to put up the link so that you can go online and go to their store and donate to the center out there, because you can buy a dozen bandanas or an incubator. They got the whole range there, so if you're feeling very generous.
yeah.
But tell us a little bit about that, that service.
Well, because a lot of my photography now is with birds, you know, that I thought, gosh, you know, how can I give back to all that they have given to me? And so I decided to start donating my time during the summer to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. And last year they did see over 9,000 animals, and they're completely supported by donations. And so I worked in the avian nursery, and oh my gosh, you know, working with these little baby birds was just, it was such a gift, you know, to be able to give to them. And they have what's on their website, you can go and they have an Amazon wish list of things that they need for the center. So in this area, we're so very fortunate to have that, so that if you would find an injured, wildlife, animal, bird, whatever, we have a place that you can take it so that it can get help and not have to suffer.
They're a tremendous resource.
Yes.
So if you ever have a question about the wildlife in your yard or whatever, we had a situation with a deer one time and called, and they were wonderful with their
Yes.
advice. So we really appreciate it. Well, thank you very much for joining us
thank
today,
you so
Kristy.
much for having me.
Yeah, it's been great to chat with you. We want to thank our guests and our hosts here at Excelsior Bay Books, and thank you for joining us. We encourage you to get out and enjoy our community. It's a wonderful place with a rich history and a bright future.